first posited by British political commentator David Goodhart, although popularised in no small part by the late Roger Scruton, the concept of somewheres and anywheres has come to serve as perhaps the most instructive shorthand for one of the deepest fault lines bisecting the modern West. The former, those both rooted in and moulded by inherited landscapes, loyalties and traditions, derive their identity principally from the continuities of home, as well as the obligations which flow from it. The pub landlord, the multi-generational farmer, and the long-suffering supporter of the local football team, among the most recognisable examples. Goodhart's anywheres, by contrast, comprise the educated and cosmopolitan sophisticates who exist quite independently of place, their allegiances lying, insofar as they have any allegiances at all, to universalist abstractions of human rights and global citizenship, international solidarity, and the innately ambiguous ideology of progress. Needless to say, it is Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, and other such Davos-anointed politicians who epitomise this archetype most explicitly. In a broader sense, however, so too does it encompass a nebulous clerisy of NGO directors, itinerant bureaucrats, and jet-setting professionals who float frictionlessly between London and Brussels, Singapore and New York, the native cultures and once sovereign borders ghosting past their business class windows, little more than antiquated obstacles to their inevitable post-national future. It is no doubt a powerful dichotomy, one capturing much of the tension that defines the current geopolitical climate. Nevertheless, it is a picture which appears increasingly incomplete. In just the last couple of weeks, we have seen the infamously curmudgeonly Peter Hitchens urge young Brits to flee a country he believes to be in precipitous and irreversible decline, some 250,000 having already emigrated in 2025 alone. This exodus constitutes not only the most quantifiable measure of how far the UK has fallen, but also a living refutation of the somewheres anywheres binary. Exiles harbouring no particular internationalist convictions, yet who have left out of perceived necessity, their roots rotted by economic strangulation, demographic replacement, and systematic cultural erasure. There is still another, far more time-honoured category, however, which Goodhart likewise neglects to mention. After all, when Brits have historically ventured beyond their homeland, the English most especially, they seldom did so through an absence of national confidence. On the contrary, their voyages typically expressed a bold and exuberant surplus of it. Indeed, the Britain of centuries past was a country unrivaled in its capacity to cultivate men, for they were overwhelmingly men, who were at once proud products of its heritage and adventurers compelled toward the most distant horizon, seeking neither to escape themselves nor the circumstances of their birth, much less to dissolve into the global ether, but to test themselves against, and often impose themselves upon, the uncharted reaches of the earth, a group which Goodhart might have called the wandering somewheres. Of course, this impulse long predates the modern British state. Some contend that it was forged as far back as the vast primordial steppe tundras of European prehistory, where the search for food, shelter, or other seasonally dependent resources compelled our Paleolithic ancestors into near constant motion. Others point to the westward migration of Eurasian warrior societies, opening up trade routes and infusing the continent with an ethos of aristocratic mobility. Yet, regardless of the source, It was an instinct which endured throughout the agricultural revolution, the establishment of permanent settlements failing to constrain early Europeans, but instead providing a springboard for ever more ambitious exploration. The Norse, for instance, buttressed by their honour-bound customs and clan-based social structures, developed a seafaring tradition that propelled them as far afield as North America, while Greek colonists upheld comparably assured civic identities as they founded New Polis from Sicily to the Black Sea. Later still, Roman settlers extended their social and legal standards across the empire's progressively advancing frontiers. The Teutonic Knights, Irish Peregrini, and most notably the Crusades, all harnessing the spiritual certainties of home into the civilization-shaping engines of pilgrimage and conquest. This dynamic was only compounded by the emergence of the nation-state, and with it, Europe's age of discovery. Portuguese and Spanish navigators such as da Gama, Magellan and Cortes were at once devout Catholics and proud Iberians, who carried their homelands with them as both a moral compass and a banner of purpose. The French and Dutch were no less convinced of their own cultural supremacy, yet it was undeniably the British for whom adventure was to prove the clearest manifestation of patriotic vigour. Certainly, one need only consider depictions of Sir Francis Drake circumnavigating the globe under the flag of St. George, or Captain James Cook planting the Union Jack in the still unmapped sands of the Pacific, to appreciate how such exploits were indelibly bound in the nation's sense of imperial destiny. David Livingstone, Ernest Shackleton, and innumerable lesser-known pioneers traversing oceans and conquering peaks in the name of king and country. Not that this compulsion was confined to the professionals. Throughout the Enlightenment, it was regarded as a rite of passage among young gentlemen of means to embark upon the grand tour, pursuing intellectual stimulation and artistic refinement across the cultural capitals of Europe. Exploration would be further democratized with the formation of the Royal Geographical Society, an organization which offered grants, training and equipment to those born outside the privileged elite. Alongside legions of missionaries, cartographers and colonial officers, these aspiring adventurers would disseminate the country's most foundational assumptions about individualism and the rule of law throughout deserts, jungles, ice fields and beyond, even as immensely popular travel narratives by the likes of Sir Richard Burton and Henry Morton Stanley transported visions of these formerly incomprehensible lands back to the bookstores and reading rooms of Britain. There is no shortage of reasons why these tendencies permeated the national psyche so comprehensively. On a purely mechanistic level, the country's island geography, as well as its proximity to similarly expansionist neighbours, generated the impetus for outward momentum, while political stability, a flourishing mercantile economy, and advanced shipbuilding techniques afforded both the necessary infrastructure and seamanship. Nevertheless, these factors alone would surely have remained mere potentialities, were it not for a far deeper, far more animating drive, which Oswald Spengler called the Faustian spirit. This uniquely Western disposition, the philosopher claimed, is defined by a restless yearning for distance and an innately insatiable hunger for the infinite, a curiosity bordering on pathological, which sought dominion over existence via scientific progress, technological advancement, artistic transcendence, and, as I have here tried to outline, physical exploration. Cultivated within the primeval forests of northern and central Europe, and named after Goethe's suicidally dissatisfied protagonist, the Faustian soul regards the world as a challenge to be mapped, measured, mastered, and ultimately overcome. It is a portrait which all but typified Britain at the peak of its colonial project, its explorers sailing not simply for power or profit, but in obedience to this metaphysical, millennia-entrenched obsession. Naturally, even these most intrepid adventurers eventually endeavoured to return. This, after all, was the cadence of the Imperial Odyssey: departure, ordeal, confrontation with the foreign, victory over its formlessness, before at last your triumphant homecoming, the traveller furnished with newly acquired knowledge and freshly revivified character, alongside a heightened appreciation for the society that had produced him. Young Britons today, leaving in almost unprecedented numbers, do so with no such expectations. If they come back at all, it will be to a country quite unrecognisable from the one they fled. The current regime, itself an extension of those which preceded it, seeking to deploy technology as an instrument of control, to leverage science as a veil for the truth, to weaponize art in the service of degeneracy, and to invert the nation's once inexorable outward thrust into a seemingly inexhaustible readiness to usher the world through its gates. Spengler would acknowledge this as a symptom of the late Faustian condition, the civilizational winter he foresaw for all Western societies. Organic vitality has degenerated into government egotism and bureaucratic megalomania. Cultural confidence has dissolved into tepid moral relativism. Boundless striving has collapsed into listlessness and self-negation, as Britain, long ago the towering embodiment of Faustian greatness, continues to ever more epitomize its inbuilt, inescapable decline. In this malaise, good hearts somewheres are not merely derided for their loyalties, but viciously and enthusiastically criminalized for them. Even his anywheres, ostensibly hegemonic, can only watch as their post-national utopia buckles under the weight of its own hubris, lacking either the humility or the desire to reverse course. Amid this capitulation, the nations wandering somewheres, at a time the pinnacle of European dynamism, have now all but vanished from the British landscape. The country that once sent its sons out as explorers and emissaries, now dispensing with them as demoralized, deracinated exiles. Hi everyone, and thanks an awful lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate if you could give it a like or a share. I can't tell you how much that helps. Well, if you're interested in seeing others like it, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Alternatively, you can always find more of my written work over on Substack, the link for which is in the description. Thanks again for your time.